This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
In the bustling city of destruction, a man named Christian lived a life plagued by inner turmoil. He carried an invisible burden on his back, a crushing weight that symbolized the accumulation of his sins over the years. The city's cobblestone streets echoed with the clamor of daily life. But for Christian, every step was a struggle. The weight on his shoulders seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment, bowing his back and etching lines of worry across his face. His nights were filled with restless dreams, visions of darkness and despair that left him gasping for breath in the cold light of dawn. One sweltering afternoon, as Christian trudged through the crowded marketplace, the air thick with the scent of spices and unwashed bodies, his eye caught a glint of something in a dusty corner. There, half buried beneath a pile of discarded goods, lay a weathered book. Its leather cover was cracked and faded, but as Christian's trembling fingers brushed away the grime, he felt a spark of electricity course through him. The book was a Bible, its pages yellowed with age but filled with words that burned with an intensity that set Christian's heart racing. As he read, the noise of the marketplace faded away, replaced by the thunderous beating of his own heart. The message pierced his soul like a bolt of lightning, illuminating the darkness that had shrouded his life for so long. With each page he turned, Christian's anxiety grew. The city around him, once familiar and comforting, now seemed to teeter on the brink of destruction. He saw his neighbors, friends, and family with new eyes, blissfully unaware of the doom that awaited them. But it was his own fate that terrified him most. The weight of his sins, once a dull ache, now threatened to drag him down into an abyss of eternal suffering. Desperate to share his newfound knowledge, Christian raced home, his feet pounding against the cobblestones. He burst through the door of his modest home, face pale and hands trembling. His wife, startled by his sudden entrance, dropped the ladle she'd been holding, sending a splash of stew across the worn wooden floor. "Listen," Christian cried, his voice cracking with emotion. "We must change our ways. Our city, our very souls are in danger." But his wife only shook her head, a mixture of pity and exasperation in her eyes. Their children, sensing the tension, huddled together in a corner, watching their father with wary expressions. "You're talking nonsense," his wife said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. "Perhaps you need to rest." Christian's pleas fell on deaf ears, not just at home, but throughout the neighborhood. Friends and neighbors alike dismissed his warnings as the ravings of a madman. Some laughed, their mocking tones cutting through him like knives. Others grew angry, their faces contorting with rage as they ordered him to keep his mad ideas to himself. Days turned to weeks, and Christian's burden grew unbearable. The weight on his back seemed to increase with each passing hour, pressing down on him until he could barely stand. He could no longer sleep, his nights spent pacing the floors of his home, muttering prayers and warnings to unhearing ears. Food lost its taste, turning to ash in his mouth. Finally, on a gray and gloomy morning, Christian made a decision that would change his life forever. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, matching the somber mood that had settled over him. He could no longer remain in the city of destruction, waiting for the inevitable. With a heavy heart, he prepared to leave behind everything he had ever known. As he stood at the threshold of his home, Christian turned to face his family one last time. Tears streamed down his face, mingling with the rain that had begun to fall. The droplets pattered against the roof, a melancholy rhythm that seemed to echo the beating of his breaking heart. "I must go," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I cannot stay here and perish. There must be a way to find deliverance, and I intend to seek it out." His wife and children began to weep, their cries piercing the air like physical blows. They clung to him, begging him to stay, their tears soaking into his threadbare shirt. Christian's resolve wavered for a moment, the love for his family warring with the desperate need to save his soul. But in the end, he knew he could not turn back. With a final, anguished look, he gently disentangled himself from their embrace and stepped out into the rain. The streets were deserted, the usual bustle of the city silenced by the downpour. As Christian ran through the muddy streets, the cries of his family echoed behind him, carried on the wind. Unable to bear the sound, He thrust his fingers into his ears and pressed on, his voice rising above the storm. "Life!" he shouted, his words carried away by the howling wind. "Life! Eternal life!" The city gates loomed before him, dark and forbidding. As Christian approached, ready to leave behind everything he had ever known, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, introducing himself as Evangelist. Evangelist listened patiently as Christian poured out his fears and doubts, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. When the tale was told, he pointed to a distant light, barely visible through the gloom. It flickered like a beacon of hope, a tiny flame in the vast darkness. "Do you see that light?" Evangelist asked, his voice calm and reassuring. "Head towards it, and you will find a wicket gate. That is where your journey truly begins." Hope blossomed in Christian's chest for the first time in months, a warmth that spread through him, pushing back the chill of the rain. Before he could set off, Evangelist pressed a parchment roll into his hands. With trembling fingers, Christian unrolled it, squinting to read the words through the rain. "Fly from the wrath to come." The words seemed to burn themselves into his mind, igniting a fire of determination within him. With renewed purpose, Christian set his sights on the distant light. The weight on his back seemed a little lighter as he took his first steps towards a new life, leaving the city of destruction behind him. As he walked, the rain began to ease, and a faint glow appeared on the horizon. Christian quickened his pace, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The path before him was unknown, promising both peril and redemption. With each step, the light grew brighter, beckoning him forward into a future filled with uncertainty and hope. Christian stood at the threshold of his journey, his heart a tumultuous mix of emotions. The path stretched out before him, disappearing into the mist. What dangers lay ahead? What trials would he face? As he took a deep breath and prepared to take his first step into the unknown, a bone-chilling howl echoed in the distance, sending a shiver down his spine. The journey had only just begun. Christian stood at the threshold of his journey, his heart a tumultuous mix of hope and fear. The path before him stretched into the unknown, promising both peril and redemption. The weight of his burden pressed heavily upon his shoulders, a constant reminder of the sins he sought to shed. As he took his first tentative steps, the world around him seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick with anticipation, the rustling leaves whispering secrets of trials to come. Christian's footfalls echoed in the stillness, each step carrying him further from the familiar and deeper into his pilgrimage. The path, at first solid and reassuring, began to change beneath his feet. The ground softened, squelching with each step. Christian's heart raced as he realized the danger too late. In an instant, he was plunging into the infamous Slough of Despond, a quagmire of doubt and fear. Cold, murky water closed in around him, stealing his breath and chilling him to the bone. The more Christian struggled, the deeper he sank. His burden, once metaphorical, now became a physical weight threatening to drag him under. The bog seemed alive, whispering his deepest fears and amplifying the guilt that had driven him to this pilgrimage. Just as the last glimmer of hope began to fade, a strong hand pierced through the gloom. "Take hold, friend," a voice called out, steady and sure. Christian grasped the outstretched hand, feeling the warmth of human contact amidst the cold despair. With a mighty heave, Christian was pulled from the clutches of the swamp. He lay gasping on solid ground, his clothes sodden and his spirit shaken. Looking up, he met the eyes of his rescuer, a man who introduced himself simply as "Help." "Thank you," Christian breathed, his voice trembling with the aftermath of fear. Help's eyes reflected a deep understanding as he spoke. "The Slough of Despond has claimed many travelers. It's a place where fears and doubts collect, impossible to fully drain. But remember, Christian, this is just the beginning of your journey." Those words ignited a spark of determination in Christian's heart. He rose to his feet, shaky but resolute, and continued on his way. The memory of the bog clung to him like the mud on his clothes, a visceral reminder of the perils that lay ahead. As Christian rounded a bend in the path, the landscape opened up before him. Rolling hills stretched to the horizon, dotted with wildflowers that swayed gently in the breeze. The peaceful scene was a stark contrast to his recent ordeal, almost lulling him into a false sense of security. It was in this moment of vulnerability that Christian encountered a well-dressed gentleman with a kindly face. "Good day, traveler," the man greeted him, his voice smooth as honey. "I am Mr. Worldly Wiseman from the town of Carnal Policy. What brings you to these parts?" Christian, still shaken and eager for companionship, poured out his story. Mr. Worldly Wiseman listened with a sympathetic ear, his brow furrowing with what appeared to be genuine concern. "My dear boy," he said, shaking his head, "this evangelist has led you astray. There's a much easier path to salvation, you know." The promise of an easier journey tugged at Christian's weary heart like a siren song. "Tell me more," he urged, leaning in closer, desperate for any relief from his burdens. Mr. Worldly Wiseman's eyes gleamed with an intensity that Christian, in his exhaustion, failed to recognize as dangerous. "In the village of morality, there lives a man named Mr. Legality. He has helped many find peace without such perilous journeys. Why not seek him out instead?" The idea of a simpler solution washed over Christian like a soothing balm. Against the quiet protests of his conscience, he veered from his original course, following Mr. Worldly Wiseman's directions with a mixture of hope and trepidation. As Christian approached the village of morality, the landscape began to change. The gentle hills gave way to increasingly steep terrain until a towering mountain loomed before him. With each step towards it, his burden seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on him with unbearable weight. The mountain itself appeared to sway, as if threatening to topple and crush him beneath its mass. Fear gripped Christian's heart once more, but this time it was tinged with bitter regret. He had strayed from the path, and now he was paying the price. The air grew thin, making each breath a struggle. Sweat beaded on his brow as he fought against the overwhelming urge to turn back. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm him, a familiar voice cut through the air like a beacon of hope. "Christian, what are you doing here?" Christian turned to see Evangelist, his face a mixture of concern and disappointment. Shame washed over Christian in waves as he explained his encounter with Mr. Worldly Wiseman and his misguided detour. Evangelist's expression grew stern, his words cutting deep. "Oh, Christian," he said, his voice heavy with rebuke, "how easily you were led astray. The path of works cannot lead to true salvation. Only faith can guide you to the wicket gate." Though the words stung, they also rekindled the flame of purpose in Christian's heart. With gentle but firm guidance, Evangelist redirected him back to the true path, reminding him of the importance of staying steadfast in his journey towards faith. As they parted ways, Christian felt a complex mixture of emotions: humility, renewed determination, and a deeper understanding of the challenges that lay ahead. He had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of seeking easy solutions and the importance of staying true to his spiritual calling. With a deep breath, Christian set his sights once more on the wicket gate. The path ahead still seemed daunting, but now he faced it with clearer eyes and a stronger resolve. As he took his first steps back onto the righteous path, the world around him seemed to shift. The air grew thick with anticipation, and in the distance Christian could just make out the faintest glimmer of something that made his heart race with hope and fear. Was it the wicket gate, the entrance to the true Christian life he had long sought? Or was it another trial, waiting to test his newfound determination? With each step, the glimmer grew brighter, calling to him like a beacon in the gathering dusk. Christian pressed on, his journey far from over, his destiny still uncertain. Christian's weary feet had carried him far, through trials and tribulations. At last they brought him to the wicket gate, the entrance to the true Christian life he had long sought. The air around him grew thick with anticipation, each breath a struggle against the weight of his journey. The gate loomed before him, its weathered wood a testament to the countless souls who had passed through before. Christian's heart thundered in his chest, a mix of excitement and fear coursing through his veins. With trembling fingers, he reached out and knocked. The sound echoed in the stillness, seeming to reverberate through the very fabric of reality. Silence answered him, heavy and oppressive. Christian swallowed hard, his throat dry as sand. He knocked again, harder this time, desperation lending strength to his arm. "May I enter?" he called out, his voice cracking. "Please, I beg you, let me in." Just as hope began to fade, the gate creaked open. A figure appeared, bathed in a warm, golden light that seemed to push back the shadows. This was Goodwill, the gatekeeper, his eyes twinkling with a kindness that made Christian's heart ache. Without a word, Goodwill reached out and yanked Christian inside with surprising strength. The gate slammed shut behind them, the sound like thunder in Christian's ears. "Quickly now," Goodwill whispered urgently, his breath warm against Christian's ear. "Beelzebub and his demons often shoot arrows at those about to enter. We mustn't linger here." Christian's eyes widened, his gaze darting around nervously. The shadows at the edges of his vision seemed to writhe and twist, taking on sinister shapes. "Arrows?" he whispered back, his voice barely audible. Goodwill nodded gravely, his face etched with concern. "The path to salvation is not without its perils, my friend. But tell me, how did you come to find this gate?" As Christian recounted his journey, the words tumbling out in a rush, Goodwill listened intently. His expression shifted between concern and approval, his eyes never leaving Christian's face. When Christian finished, breathless and spent, Goodwill placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You've shown great courage," he said softly, "but the road ahead is fraught with danger. You must be prepared. Seek out the interpreter's house for further instruction. It lies just ahead on your path." With a grateful nod, Christian set off towards the interpreter's house. His steps were lighter now, buoyed by hope, but his mind was heavy with anticipation of what was to come. The interpreter's house loomed before him, an imposing structure that seemed to pulse with hidden knowledge. Christian hesitated at the threshold, his hand hovering over the door handle. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, and entered. Inside, he was led through a series of rooms, each one a world unto itself. In the first, a man furiously swept a dusty floor, his efforts seeming futile as the dust swirled around him in choking clouds. "The law," the interpreter explained, his voice soft but clear. "It can point out our sins, but it cannot cleanse them." Another figure appeared, sprinkling water on the floor. The dust began to settle, and the air cleared, revealing a room of startling beauty. "But the gospel," the interpreter continued, "can wash away our sins and make us clean." Christian's heart swelled with understanding, the truth of these words resonating deep within him like a bell struck in his very soul. In another room, a fire burned fiercely against a wall, its heat searing Christian's skin. A figure stood nearby, continuously pouring water on the flames, yet the fire only grew stronger. Christian watched in awe, feeling the flames licking at his face. "This fire," the interpreter said, his voice filled with reverence, "represents the work of grace in the heart. Satan, represented by the one pouring water, tries to extinguish it, but Christ, unseen on the other side, continually feeds the fire with the oil of his grace." Christian's eyes stung, not just from the smoke, but from the profound beauty of this truth. He could almost feel the oil of grace seeping into his own heart, kindling a flame that burned away his doubts and fears. As they moved through the house, Christian encountered two children, Passion, with eyes that burned with impatience, demanding immediate gratification, and Patience, whose calm demeanor spoke of wisdom beyond his years. The contrast between them was stark, and Christian found himself reflecting on his own desires and choices, wondering which child he more closely resembled. But it was the final two rooms that shook Christian to his core. In one, a man sat trapped in an iron cage of despair, his face a mask of anguish. His words, spoken in a voice that seemed to scrape against the very air, told of his inability to find repentance. The hopelessness in the man's eyes bored into Christian's soul, serving as a stark warning of the consequences of turning away from faith. In the last room, Christian witnessed a dreamer's vision of the day of judgment. The scene unfolded before him with terrifying clarity, souls being called to account, some rising to glory, others falling into despair. The vivid imagery sent a shiver down his spine, impressing upon him the urgency of his own salvation with a force that left him breathless. As Christian left the interpreter's house, His mind reeled with all he had seen and learned. These vivid lessons had prepared him for the challenges he would face on his journey, arming him with wisdom and strengthening his resolve. With a deep breath, he stepped back onto the path, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The road stretched before him, winding its way through a landscape that seemed to shift and change with each step. In the distance, Christian could make out the outline of a hill, its peak crowned with something he couldn't quite make out. His feet, though tired, carried him forward with renewed purpose. As he drew closer, his heart began to race. The hill was topped with a cross, its silhouette stark against the sky. At its base, nestled in shadow, lay what appeared to be a sepulchre. Christian's breath caught in his throat as he realized the profound significance of what lay before him. What secrets did this place hold? What trials awaited him here? With trembling steps, he began to climb, the weight of his journey pressing down upon him as he ascended towards the unknown. Christian's journey led him to a place of profound significance. It was a hill crowned with a cross, a sepulchre nestled at its base. As he approached, an invisible force seemed to pull him forward, each step lighter than the last. The air shimmered with anticipation, carrying the scent of hope and renewal. His heart pounded as he neared the foot of the cross. Suddenly, a miracle unfolded before his eyes. The burden he had carried for so long, a physical manifestation of his sins and doubts, loosened from his back. With a soft thud, it fell away, rolling into the open sepulchre and vanishing from sight. Christian gasped, his eyes wide with wonder. The weight that had bowed his back and clouded his mind was gone in an instant. He felt as light as a feather, his heart soaring with newfound freedom. Tears of joy streamed down his face as he stretched, reveling in the absence of the crushing load. As he stood there, marveling at this incredible turn of events, the air around him began to shimmer and glow. 3 radiant figures materialized before him, the Shining Ones. Their faces were kind, their eyes full of warmth, and their voices like the sweetest music. "Welcome, weary traveler," said the first, his voice rich and soothing. "Your journey has brought you to a place of great significance." The second Shining One stepped forward, holding out a bundle of clothes that seemed to glow with an inner light. "These garments are for you," they said gently. "They represent the righteousness of Christ, which now clothes you." As Christian donned the new garments, his tattered rags fell away like autumn leaves. The fabric was softer than anything he had ever felt, warm and comforting against his skin. The third Shining One approached, a small scroll in one hand and a quill in the other. With a touch as light as a butterfly's wing, they marked Christian's forehead. "This mark signifies your new identity in Christ," they explained, their eyes twinkling. "You are forever changed." Finally, they presented him with the scroll, its seal glinting in the sunlight. "This is the assurance of your salvation," they said solemnly. "Keep it close to your heart always." As the Shining Ones faded from view, joy bubbled up from deep within Christian. It spilled out in a song of praise and thanksgiving, his voice ringing out clear and strong across the hillside. Each step of his continued journey felt like a dance, his heart light and his spirit soaring. The path led him to a curious and somewhat disturbing sight. 3 men, fast asleep and bound in heavy chains. Their names were Simple, Sloth, and Presumption. Christian's heart went out to them, and he called out, trying to rouse them from their slumber. "Wake up, friends," he cried, his voice urgent. "Don't you see the danger you're in? Come, join me on the path to salvation." But his words fell on deaf ears. The men merely grumbled and turned away, the chains clinking as they moved. Christian sighed, realizing he couldn't force them to change. With a heavy heart, he moved on, hoping they would find their way someday. Further along the path, the landscape changed. The air grew cooler, and a mist began to gather at his feet. Christian encountered 2 more travelers, Formalist and Hypocrisy. Unlike Christian, who had entered through the Wicket gate, these men had simply climbed over the wall. Their clothes were fine, but there was something off about their demeanor, a coldness in their eyes, a falseness in their smiles. "Why did you not enter through the gate?" Christian asked, curiosity getting the better of him. Formalist scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "Why bother with such formalities? We're on the path now, aren't we? That's all that matters. Hypocrisy nodded in agreement, his smile never reaching his eyes. Indeed, the end justifies the means after all. Christian frowned, sensing the falsehood in their words. He engaged them in a spirited debate about the true nature of salvation, his newfound knowledge giving weight to his arguments. But like the sleeping men before, formalist and hypocrisy were set in their ways. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Christian bid them farewell, hoping his words had planted a seed of truth in their hearts. As night fell, the path led Christian to a magnificent structure that seemed to glow in the darkness. The Palace Beautiful. It stood tall and proud, its windows glowing with warm, inviting light. But between Christian and the palace, door prowled two fierce lions, their eyes gleaming like embers in the night. Fear gripped Christian's heart, cold and paralyzing. He hesitated, his legs trembling beneath him. But then a voice called out from the palace, cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. "Fear not, Pilgrim. The lions are chained. They cannot harm you if you stay on the path." The voice belonged to Watchful, the porter. His kind face peered out from a window, offering encouragement. Swallowing his fear, Christian stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the palace door. The lions growled and snapped, their hot breath on his legs, but true to Watchful's word, they could not reach him. Inside the Palace Beautiful, Christian was greeted by three sisters: Piety, Prudence, and Charity. Their faces shone with kindness, and they welcomed him as if he were a long-lost brother, enveloping him in warm embraces. "Come," said Piety, taking his hand. "You must be hungry after your long journey." They led him to a grand dining room where a feast was laid out. The aroma of roasted meats and freshly baked bread made Christian's mouth water. As he ate, savoring every bite, the sisters shared stories of the Lord's kingdom, its glorious past and the promise of its future. Their words painted vivid pictures in Christian's mind, filling him with hope and wonder. After the meal, Prudence showed him to the palace armory. Rows upon rows of gleaming weapons and armor lined the walls, each piece more magnificent than the last. "These are not ordinary weapons," Prudence explained, her voice filled with reverence. "This is the armor of God, designed to protect you on your journey." With great care, the sisters helped Christian don the armor. The breastplate of righteousness fit snugly across his chest, the shield of faith was sturdy in his grip, and the helmet of salvation sat comfortably on his head. Each piece fit him perfectly, as if made just for him, and Christian marveled at how light yet strong they felt. As dawn broke, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, Christian prepared to leave the Palace Beautiful. His heart was full of gratitude for the kindness shown to him. Charity embraced him warmly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Remember," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you carry not just armor, but the love and prayers of all who dwell here." With a final wave, Christian set out once more, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The armor of God gleamed in the morning sun, a testament to the transformation he had undergone and the battles yet to come. As he descended the steps of the Palace Beautiful, a chill wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of distant thunder. Christian paused, his hand on the hilt of his sword, as he peered into the misty valley below. What new trials awaited him in the shadows? Christian bid farewell to the Palace Beautiful, his heart heavy with mixed emotions. As he stepped out, gratitude for the hospitality he had received mingled with trepidation for the journey ahead. The path before him led downward, winding its way into the Valley of Humiliation. A chill ran down his spine as he gazed upon the forbidding landscape. The air grew thick and oppressive as Christian ventured deeper into the valley. Gnarled trees lined the path, their twisted branches reaching out like grasping fingers. Shadows danced across the ground, playing tricks on his eyes. Each step felt like wading through molasses, the very earth seeming to resist his progress. A bone-chilling roar shattered the eerie silence, echoing off the valley walls. Christian's blood ran cold as he beheld a monstrous figure blocking his path. Apollyon, a fearsome demon representing the devil himself, loomed before him. The creature's massive form was covered in gleaming scales that seemed to absorb what little light filtered through the gloom. Leathery wings unfurled from its back, stirring up gusts of foul-smelling wind that made Christian's eyes water. Apollyon's eyes, burning like twin infernos, fixed upon Christian. "Turn back, foolish mortal," the demon growled, its voice like grinding stone. "Return to my service, or face your doom." Christian's legs trembled beneath him, but he planted his feet firmly on the ground. His heart raced, but he drew a deep breath, steeling himself. "I serve only the King of Princes," he declared, his voice stronger than he felt. "I will not yield to you, Apollyon." Rage contorted the demon's features, its mouth twisting into a snarl that revealed rows of razor-sharp teeth. With a deafening roar that shook the very ground, Apollyon unleashed a barrage of flaming darts. They whistled through the air, leaving trails of acrid smoke in their wake. The heat seared Christian's skin as he raised his shield of faith just in time, the projectiles sizzling against its surface. A fierce battle erupted, the clash of Christian's sword against Apollyon's claws echoing through the valley. Hours passed like mere moments as they fought, neither willing to yield. Christian's arms ached, his muscles screaming in protest with each swing of his sword. His breath came in ragged gasps, the taste of copper filling his mouth. Wounds appeared on his body, each one a testament to the demon's relentless assault. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Christian felt his strength waning. His movements grew sluggish, his parries less precise. Sweat stung his eyes, blurring his vision. In a moment of weakness, his foot caught on a gnarled root, and he stumbled. Apollyon, seizing the opportunity, pounced upon him, pinning Christian to the ground with its enormous weight. Panic gripped Christian's heart as he lay trapped beneath the demon. The stench of sulfur filled his nostrils, Apollyon's hot breath on his face like the fires of hell itself. In that moment of utter desperation, Christian's fingers brushed against the hilt of his sword. With a surge of renewed hope, he grasped it tightly, feeling the familiar weight in his hand. "Rejoice not against me, O mine enemy," Christian cried out, his voice ringing with defiance. "When I fall, I shall arise." With all his remaining strength, he thrust the blade upward, striking true. A piercing shriek tore through the air as Apollyon recoiled. The demon's form seemed to waver, like a mirage in the desert heat. Then, with a final roar of fury and pain, Apollyon spread its wings and took flight, disappearing into the darkening sky. Christian lay on the ground, battered and bleeding, but alive. His chest heaved as he struggled to catch his breath, every inch of his body screaming in pain. As he fought to remain conscious, a warm light enveloped him, soothing his aching limbs. A gentle hand appeared, offering leaves from the tree of life. With trembling fingers, Christian took the leaves and applied them to his wounds. Miraculously, his injuries began to heal, strength flowing back into his weary limbs like a rejuvenating river. Filled with gratitude, Christian offered a heartfelt prayer of thanks to God for his deliverance. As he rose to his feet, he felt renewed, both in body and spirit. The battle had tested him to his very limits, pushing him to the brink of despair, but he had emerged victorious. With his sword still firmly in hand, Christian gathered his belongings and the provisions that had sustained him. The path ahead still held unknown challenges, but he felt ready to face them. His recent triumph over Apollyon had strengthened his resolve and deepened his faith, like a fire tempered in the hottest forge. As Christian set forth once more, his steps were steady and purposeful. The valley of humiliation lay behind him, a testament to his perseverance and faith. Though the journey ahead remained uncertain, he moved forward with courage and determination, prepared for whatever encounters might await him. The sun had fully set now, plunging the world into darkness. Christian squinted, trying to make out the path before him. As he rounded a bend, he came to an abrupt halt. His breath caught in his throat as he beheld what lay ahead. A vast expanse of impenetrable blackness stretched out before him, swallowing all light. The air grew heavy, thick with an oppressive silence that seemed to press in on him from all sides. Christian stood at the entrance of the Valley of the Shadow of Death, his heart pounding with trepidation as he gazed into the realm of utter darkness and terror before him. Christian stood at the entrance of the Valley of the Shadow of Death. His heart pounded with trepidation as he gazed into the realm of utter darkness and terror before him. The air hung heavy, thick with an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow even the sound of his ragged breathing. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, taunting him with glimpses of unseen horrors. Taking a deep breath that tasted of decay and despair, Christian stepped forward. The ground beneath his feet immediately narrowed, forcing him to walk with careful, measured steps. To his left, a yawning ditch stretched into infinity, its depths promising a swift and merciless end. On his right, a quagmire of thick, bubbling mud gurgled and hissed, as if whispering promises of a slow, suffocating demise. The stench hit him like a physical blow, a nauseating mix of rotting flesh and sulfurous fumes. Christian's stomach churned, and he fought the urge to retch. Each breath became a battle, his lungs burning as they struggled to find clean air. As he ventured deeper into the valley, the silence shattered. Howls and screeches erupted from the darkness, their sources invisible but undeniably close. The cries seemed to come from everywhere at once, disorienting Christian and sending shivers down his spine. The darkness pressed in, a tangible weight that threatened to crush him. In this lightless realm, Christian's fingers fumbled for his precious scroll. He clutched it tightly, its familiar texture a small comfort in the overwhelming gloom. Each step became a test of will, his muscles screaming for him to turn and flee. Blasphemous whispers slithered into his ears, their words dripping with malice. "Turn back, fool," they hissed. "This path leads only to destruction." The voices played on his deepest fears, promising safety and comfort if he would only abandon his journey. Christian shook his head violently, trying to dislodge the insidious thoughts. His voice trembled as he began to recite scriptures, the familiar words a shield against the encroaching darkness. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," he murmured, his voice growing stronger with each word. A presence materialized behind him, sending ice through Christian's veins. Hot, fetid breath ghosted across the back of his neck. An unseen demon began to whisper directly into his mind, planting seeds of doubt and self-loathing. Christian stumbled forward, horrified as he realized he had begun to mistake these invasive thoughts for his own. "These can't be my thoughts," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper in the oppressive darkness. "I reject them. They are not mine." His words echoed back to him, small and fragile against the vastness of the valley. The path twisted and turned, each bend revealing new horrors. Halfway through the valley, Christian's foot met empty air. He recoiled, heart pounding, as he realized a deep pit yawned before him. With no way to see, he was forced to inch his way around the chasm, fingers scraping against rough stone as he felt for safe passage. Just when despair threatened to overwhelm him, a sound reached his ears that made his heart leap. A voice, faint but unmistakable, drifted through the darkness. The words of Psalm 23, sung with a trembling but determined voice, cut through the gloom like a beacon of hope. Christian felt a surge of courage flood through him. He was not alone in this dreadful place. With renewed determination, Christian pressed on. Each moment stretched into an eternity of darkness and fear, but he clung to the memory of that distant voice. At last, after what felt like years of struggle, a faint glimmer of light appeared in the distance. Christian's pace quickened, his heart racing as the light grew stronger. Finally, he emerged from the valley of the shadow of death, blinking in the sudden brightness. As his eyes adjusted, Christian turned to look back at the perilous path he had traversed. The sight of the dangers he had passed through filled him with awe and gratitude. He fell to his knees, offering heartfelt thanks for his deliverance. As he rose to his feet, Christian felt a profound change within himself. The harrowing journey through the valley had not broken him. Instead, it had forged his faith into something stronger, more resilient. He stood taller, his resolve hardened, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead on his pilgrimage. Christian took a deep breath of the clean air, savoring its sweetness after the foulness of the valley. He turned to continue his journey, his spirit buoyed by his triumph over darkness. But as he took his first steps away from the valley, a familiar voice called out from behind him. Christian froze, his blood running cold as he slowly turned to face the sound. Could it be? Had someone else emerged from the valley of the shadow of death? Christian's weary feet carried him swiftly along the path. His heart lightened at the sight of a familiar figure ahead. The dusty road stretched before him, winding through a landscape of rolling hills and scattered trees. The sun beat down mercilessly, causing sweat to beat on his brow and trickle down his back. "Faithful!" Christian called out, his voice cracking with a mixture of joy and exhaustion. "What a blessing to find you on this road." The figure turned, revealing the face of Faithful, a fellow pilgrim from Christian's hometown. A warm smile spread across his features, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Christian, my old friend, how good it is to see you." They embraced, the touch of a friendly hand providing comfort in this strange and often hostile world. As they began to walk together, the oppressive heat seemed to lessen, and the weight of their burdens felt more bearable. Their voices rose and fell with the rhythm of their footsteps, sharing tales of their journeys thus far. Faithful's story was one of narrow escapes and hard-won victories. He spoke of Wanton, whose honeyed words and alluring glances had nearly led him astray. Christian could almost hear the seductive whispers as Faithful recounted his struggle, feeling a shiver of recognition at the temptations he too had faced. "But it was Adam the first who truly tested me," Faithful continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "He promised me all the pleasures of the world, Christian. For a moment, I almost forgot why I had set out on this journey in the first place." Christian nodded, understanding all too well the pull of earthly delights, but it was Faithful's next words that sent a chill down his spine. "And then I met Moses." Christian's eyes widened. "Moses? The lawgiver himself?" Faithful nodded gravely, his face pale at the memory. "He came at me with a vengeance for my past sins. I thought surely I was done for. But then—" His voice trailed off, filled with wonder. "Christ intervened. He saved me, Christian. He saved me when I thought all hope was lost." As they journeyed on, the landscape changed, becoming more treacherous. Jagged rocks jutted from the earth, and thorny bushes encroached upon the narrow path. It was in this hostile terrain that they encountered Talkative, a man whose silver tongue could weave intricate tapestries of religious discourse. At first, Faithful was impressed by Talkative's eloquence, but Christian, wary and wise, saw through the facade. He leaned close to his friend, his breath warm against Faithful's ear. "Be careful, my friend. Talkative's words are like honey, sweet to the ear but lacking substance. His faith is as shallow as a puddle after a light rain." Heeding Christian's warning, Faithful engaged Talkative in conversation, his questions gentle but probing. As they talked, the facade began to crumble. Talkative's grand speeches gave way to stammering and evasion, revealing the emptiness behind his words. In the end, Talkative fell silent, exposed, and ashamed. The road wound on, the sun dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the path. It was then that they met Evangelist once more. His face was grave, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and concern. "My dear friends," he said, his voice low and urgent, "you are approaching the town of Vanity. Be prepared, for great trials await you there." With Evangelist's warning ringing in their ears, Christian and Faithful approached Vanity Fair. The town rose before them like a gaudy jewel, its streets teeming with people, its air thick with the clamor of commerce and revelry. Bright banners fluttered in the breeze, and the scent of exotic spices and perfumes wafted through the air. The moment they entered, all eyes turned to them. Their simple clothes and earnest faces stood out like sore thumbs amidst the flashy finery and painted smiles of Vanity's citizens. Whispers turned to jeers, and soon Christian and Faithful found themselves surrounded by a hostile crowd. "Look at these fools," someone shouted, their voice dripping with contempt. "They refuse our wares and scorn our pleasures." Before they knew it, rough hands seized them, dragging them through the streets. The cobblestones were slick beneath their feet, and the angry faces of the crowd blurred into a nightmarish tableau. They were brought before Judge Hategood, a man whose very name sent chills down their spines. The courtroom was a mockery of justice, filled with men whose hearts were as corrupt as the goods they peddled in the fair. The air was thick with tension, and Christian could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Faithful, his face serene despite the danger, stood before the court. His voice, clear and strong, rang out as he defended his faith. "I serve a king greater than any earthly ruler," he declared, his words cutting through the hostile murmurs of the crowd. "His laws are just, his love is boundless, and his truth is eternal." But his words fell on deaf ears. The verdict was swift and merciless. Faithful was condemned to death, his fate sealed by men who feared the light he brought into their dark world. Christian watched in horror as his friend was led away. The execution was brutal, a spectacle meant to crush the spirit of any who dared to challenge vanity's corrupt ways. The crack of the whip, the jeers of the crowd, and Faithful's unwavering prayers all blended into a cacophony of cruelty and faith. But even as Faithful's earthly life ended, Christian saw a light in his eyes that no darkness could extinguish. It was as if, in his final moments, Faithful could see beyond the veil of this world to the glories that awaited him. Grief-stricken but determined, Christian seized a moment of chaos to slip away from his captors. His heart pounded in his chest as he fled through the winding streets of Vanity Fair, ducking into shadows and alleyways to evade pursuit. As he finally broke free of the town's oppressive walls, Christian found himself alone once more on the pilgrim's path. The weight of Faithful's sacrifice pressed heavily upon him, threatening to crush his spirit. But as he stumbled forward, tears blurring his vision, he caught sight of a figure in the distance. Who could it be? A new companion, or perhaps a new threat? With evangelist's prophecy echoing in his mind, Christian pressed on, his heart a mixture of hope and trepidation as he approached the unknown figure on the road ahead. Christian found himself alone once again on the winding path of his pilgrimage after Faithful's martyrdom. However, his solitude was short-lived, as he was soon joined by Hopeful, a new convert from Vanity Fair. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers as Christian and Hopeful set off together. Their footsteps fell in sync, a rhythmic crunch against the gravelly path. The sun, a pale disk behind wispy clouds, cast long shadows across their way, as if pointing towards their distant goal. Christian felt a surge of renewed purpose with Hopeful by his side. Their shared experiences and faith created a bond that seemed to strengthen with each step. As they walked, they shared stories of their past, their voices low and earnest against the backdrop of rustling leaves and chirping birds. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the road ahead, his approach heralded by the soft jingle of coins. Mr. Bunyan, a man with a sly smile and shifty eyes, claimed to be a fellow pilgrim. Yet something about his demeanor set Christian's teeth on edge. Bunyan spoke of adjusting his religious practices to suit his comfort and gain, his words dripping with self-justification like honey from a poison comb. Christian and Hopeful exchanged a knowing glance, their spirits troubled. The air crackled with tension as they engaged in a heated debate with Bunyan and his companions. Mr. Hold the World, Mr. Moneylove, and Mr. Save All. Christian's impassioned words cut through their worldly attitudes like a sword through mist, exposing the hollowness of their faith. As they pressed on, the path wound through rocky terrain. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat beaded on their brows. Suddenly, a glint caught their eye. A silver mine lay just off the beaten track. A man named Damas stood at its entrance, his voice as smooth as the ore he promised. "Come, weary travelers," he called. "Why struggle on this difficult path when riches await you here?" Christian's jaw set firmly, his eyes never leaving the true path before him. "We will not be swayed by earthly treasures," he declared, his voice steady and resolute. Hopeful nodded in agreement, though Christian noticed a flicker of longing in his companion's eyes. They watched in dismay as Bunyan and his friends, overcome by greed, eagerly abandoned their journey for the mine. Their figures grew smaller as they scrambled toward the false promise of wealth, leaving the true path behind. The sound of their excited chatter faded, replaced by the mournful cry of a distant bird. The road took on a somber air as Christian and Hopeful reflected on the fate of those who had strayed. Then, as if to drive the lesson home, they came upon a chilling sight, a pillar of salt in the form of a woman, her face frozen in an expression of longing and regret. The monument stood as a stark warning against looking back at the sinful world they had left behind. Christian and Hopeful stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing upon them. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the faint echoes of past temptations and the price of compromise. As they resumed their journey, their steps were more measured, their resolve strengthened by the sobering reminders they had encountered. Their discussions along the way became deeper, more introspective. They shared their fears, their doubts, and their hopes, each word cementing their friendship and deepening their understanding of true discipleship. The challenges they had faced together had forged a bond stronger than steel, a shared commitment to staying true to their faith despite the allurements of the world. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Christian and Hopeful found themselves on higher ground. They paused to look back at the path they had traveled, marveling at the obstacles overcome and the growth they had experienced. Their journey together had not only strengthened their resolve, but had also opened their eyes to the subtle dangers of compromise and the immeasurable value of steadfast faith. With renewed purpose and deepened friendship, Christian and Hopeful continued their pilgrimage, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead on their path to the celestial city. But as night fell and shadows lengthened, an overwhelming weariness began to seep into their bones. Each step became a monumental effort, and Christian couldn't help but wonder if they would have the strength to face what lay ahead in the encroaching darkness. Christian and Hopeful trudged along the path, their bodies aching from the long journey. Weariness had settled deep into their bones, making each step a challenge. The sun beat down mercilessly, its heat seeming to sap what little strength remained in their limbs. Sweat trickled down their faces, leaving trails in the dust that caked their skin. As they rounded a bend, their eyes fell upon a wooden stile leading to a lush, inviting meadow. The sight was like a mirage in the desert of their fatigue. Tall grass swayed gently in the breeze, a stark contrast to the rough, unyielding terrain they had been traversing. A well-worn path meandered through the meadow, running parallel to their current route, promising easier passage. "Look," Christian said, his voice barely above a whisper, tinged with a mixture of hope and hesitation. "Bypath Meadow. It seems to run alongside our way, but it looks far easier on the feet." Hopeful paused, his brow furrowing with concern. "But is it the right path?" he asked, voicing the doubt that nagged at both their minds. Christian's eyes gleamed with temptation, the allure of an easier journey battling with his sense of duty. "Just for a while," he reasoned, his voice taking on a persuasive tone. "To rest our weary legs. We can always return to the true way." With a shared nod, they clambered over the stile. The moment their feet touched the soft grass, it was as if a great burden had been lifted. The change was immediate. Their steps lightened, and the weariness that had plagued them seemed to dissipate like morning mist. As they walked, reveling in the newfound ease of their journey, a fellow traveler joined them. He introduced himself as Vain Confidence, his easy smile and assured manner putting them at ease. "Fear not, friends," Vain Confidence declared, his voice ringing with certainty. "This path is safe and true. I've traveled it many times." But as the day wore on, the sky began to change. Thick, ominous clouds rolled in, blotting out the sun that had earlier seemed so oppressive. A chill wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain and a foreboding that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. Suddenly, a crack of thunder split the air, so loud it seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. Rain began to pour, fat droplets quickly turning the once pleasant meadow into a treacherous quagmire. The path became slick and muddy, each step a potential pitfall. In the growing darkness, a cry rang out. Vain Confidence, walking ahead, had disappeared. Christian and Hopeful rushed forward, their hearts pounding, to find him fallen into a deep pit. His fate served as a chilling warning of the dangers that lurked in the seemingly innocent meadow. Panic gripped Christian and Hopeful. They turned to retrace their steps, but the storm's fury made it impossible. Lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, terrifying flashes, revealing unfamiliar terrain that seemed to shift and change with each bolt. "We've strayed too far," Christian shouted over the howling wind, his voice barely audible above the storm's rage. "We must find shelter." Through the driving rain, they spotted a looming structure, a castle, its stone walls promising refuge from the storm. Without hesitation, they stumbled towards it, relief flooding their hearts as they passed through the gates. But their relief was short-lived. As they entered the courtyard, water streaming from their sodden clothes, a monstrous figure emerged from the shadows. Giant Despair, the castle's fearsome owner, towered over them, his eyes gleaming with malice in the dim light. "Trespassers," he roared, his voice like rolling thunder. "You dare enter Doubting Castle?" Before they could react, Giant Despair seized them in his massive hands. They struggled in vain, their wet clothes offering no purchase, as he carried them deep into the castle's bowels. With a cruel laugh, he tossed them into a dark, foul-smelling dungeon. Days passed in miserable succession, each one blending into the next in the perpetual gloom of their prison. Giant Despair and his wife, Diffidence, took cruel pleasure in tormenting their prisoners. They beat Christian and Hopeful mercilessly, their bodies bruised and battered, their spirits wavering under the relentless assault. "End your suffering," Giant Despair sneered one day, tossing a knife into their cell. The blade clattered on the stone floor, a tempting gleam in the darkness. "Take your own lives and be done with this misery." Christian, once so full of faith, felt hope slipping away like sand through an hourglass. The darkness of the dungeon seemed to seep into his very soul, poisoning his thoughts. "Perhaps," he whispered, his voice hollow and defeated, "perhaps he's right." But Hopeful lived up to his name. Even in the depths of despair, he clung to a flicker of faith like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. "No, my friend," he said, gripping Christian's shoulder with surprising strength. "We must endure. Our journey is not yet done." As Christian teetered on the brink of giving up, a memory stirred in the recesses of his mind. His hand moved to his chest, feeling the outline of something he had almost forgotten. A key called Promise. "Hopeful!" he exclaimed, his voice hoarse but filled with renewed vigor. "The key! We have the key!" With trembling hands, Christian produced the key. It glowed faintly in the gloom, a beacon of hope in their darkest hour. They inserted it into the cell's lock, hardly daring to breathe. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the very foundations of Doubting Castle. Heart pounding, they crept through the castle, using the key to open each door that barred their path. At last, they reached the final gate. As it swung open, the fresh air of freedom rushed to greet them, sweet and intoxicating after the fetid air of their prison. They ran, not daring to look back until they were safely on the King's Highway once more. Only then did they pause, gasping for breath, the reality of their escape sinking in like a stone in a still pond. Christian turned to Hopeful, his eyes shining with gratitude and newfound wisdom. "We must warn others," he said, his voice firm with resolve, "so they don't fall into the same trap." Together they gathered stones and built a pillar by the stile leading to Bypath Meadow. On it they carved a warning, "Beware the path to Doubting Castle and Giant Despair." The words stood out starkly against the rough stone, a testament to their ordeal and a beacon for future travelers. As they stepped back to view their handiwork, a sense of purpose filled them. They had not only escaped but had grown stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. With renewed determination, they set their faces towards their destination, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead on their pilgrimage. The sun was setting as they resumed their journey, casting long shadows across the path. In the distance, they could see the outline of mountains against the darkening sky. Christian felt a stirring of hope in his chest. "Look, Hopeful," he said, pointing ahead. "Could those be the Delectable Mountains?" Hopeful squinted into the twilight. "It could be," he replied, a note of excitement in his voice. "They say those mountains offer rest and refreshment for weary pilgrims." With renewed energy, they quickened their pace, eager to reach this promised haven. But as night fell and the mountains drew nearer, an unsettling mist began to rise from the ground. It swirled around their feet, growing thicker with each step until they could barely see the path before them. "Christian," Hopeful called out, his voice muffled by the fog, "are you sure we're still on the right path?" Christian's response was lost in the eerie silence that had descended upon them. As they pressed on, the mist seemed to whisper with ghostly voices, and shadows danced at the edge of their vision. What new trials awaited them in this mysterious landscape? And would the Delectable Mountains prove to be the sanctuary they hoped for, or yet another test of their faith and resolve? Christian and Hopeful's weary feet finally found respite. They had reached the Delectable Mountains, a haven long anticipated that promised rest and refreshment for the travel-worn pilgrims. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. As they ascended the gentle slopes, their spirits lifted with each step. The weight of their journey seemed to fall away, replaced by a growing sense of peace and anticipation. Suddenly, they encountered 4 figures standing atop a grassy knoll. The sun glinted off their weathered faces, etched with lines of wisdom and kindness. These were the shepherds: knowledge, experience, watchful, and sincere. "Welcome, weary travelers," called out Knowledge, his eyes twinkling with wisdom. "We've been expecting you." The shepherds' warm smiles and outstretched hands immediately put Christian and Hopeful at ease. They were led to a cozy cottage where they shared a hearty meal, their bodies and souls finding nourishment in equal measure. The fire crackled merrily in the hearth, its warmth seeping into their bones and chasing away the last vestiges of fatigue. As dawn broke the next day, Experience beckoned them outside. "Come," he said, his voice rough but kind. "Let us show you the wonders of these mountains." They climbed to a vantage point where the world seemed to stretch out endlessly before them. The air grew thinner, but their hearts felt lighter with each step. In the far distance, a glimmer caught their eye: the celestial city, their ultimate destination, shimmering like a jewel on the horizon. Christian's heart swelled with renewed purpose. "Oh, Hopeful," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Look at the beauty that awaits us." But Watchful's voice cut through their awe. "Take heed," he warned, his tone grave. "The path ahead still holds dangers." The shepherds led them to sobering sights. The hill error loomed ominously, its steep cliffs a stark reminder of those who had fallen to their deaths. Christian felt a chill run down his spine as he peered over the edge, imagining the fate of those who had strayed too close. The mountain caution was shrouded in mist, where blind men stumbled among cold, unforgiving tombs. The air grew heavy with despair, and Hopeful instinctively moved closer to Christian, seeking comfort in his presence. Most chilling of all was a door set into the side of a hill. As Sincere pushed it open, a blast of heat and the echoes of agonized screams assaulted their senses. The stench of brimstone filled the air, making their eyes water and their stomachs churn. "Behold," Sincere said solemnly, "the very mouth of hell, a warning to all hypocrites." Christian and Hopeful shuddered, the weight of their journey pressing upon them anew. Yet they found strength in each other's presence and the guidance of the shepherds. The stark reality of what awaited those who strayed from the true path only strengthened their resolve to continue their journey. As the time came for their departure, the shepherds gathered around them. "Take this," said Knowledge, pressing a parchment into Christian's hand. "A note of directions for the road ahead." With heartfelt farewells and promises to remember the lessons learned, Christian and Hopeful set off once more. The mountain air invigorated them as they descended, their steps light but purposeful. It wasn't long before they encountered a young man striding confidently along the path. His face shone with an almost arrogant certainty, his clothes neat and unruffled by the journey. "Hail, fellow traveler," called Christian. "What's your name and where are you bound?" "I'm Ignorance," the youth replied, chest puffed out, "and I'm on my way to the celestial city. Same as you, I'd wager." Christian and Hopeful exchanged a worried glance. As they walked together, it became clear that Ignorance's confidence was built on shaky ground. He spoke of his own righteousness, dismissing the need for true understanding of the gospel. "But friend," Hopeful implored, his voice gentle but urgent, "how can you be so sure of your salvation without fully grasping God's grace?" Ignorance scoffed, his eyes narrowing. "I know my own heart. My good deeds speak for themselves." A lengthy discussion ensued, with Christian and Hopeful trying to explain the nature of faith, works, and salvation. But Ignorance remained steadfast in his misguided beliefs, his ears closed to their counsel. The sun beat down on them as they walked, mirroring the heat of their debate. As the day wore on, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Christian and Hopeful realized their words were falling on deaf ears. With heavy hearts, they bid Ignorance farewell, watching him stride away, oblivious to the dangers of his self-deception. "Oh, Hopeful," Christian sighed as they continued their journey, his voice heavy with concern. "How easy it is to be led astray by false confidence." Hopeful nodded solemnly. "Indeed, it reminds us of the importance of true knowledge and humility on this Christian journey." As twilight deepened around them, Christian and Hopeful pressed on, their conversation turning to the nature of true faith and the perils that await those who trust in their own understanding alone. The path before them grew darker, the air thick with an unseen presence. Suddenly, Christian stopped in his tracks. A strange mist began to curl around their feet, and an eerie silence fell over the landscape. The hair on the back of their necks stood on end as they realized they stood at the threshold of a new and treacherous realm. The enchanted ground lay before them, its sinister purpose hidden beneath a veil of deceptive beauty. "Hopeful," Christian whispered, his voice barely audible. "I fear we face our greatest test yet." As they took their first tentative steps into this beguiling territory, neither could shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Christian and Hopeful found themselves at the threshold of the enchanted ground. This treacherous realm, crafted by their enemy, was designed with a sinister purpose in mind. As they stepped into this new territory, the air around them changed. It became thick and heavy, like syrup clinging to their skin. Each breath felt like a struggle, as if they were inhaling a fog of drowsiness. The ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, whispering seductive promises of rest and comfort. Christian felt his eyelids growing heavier with each step. He glanced at Hopeful, noticing his companion's usually bright eyes now dulled with fatigue. "We must stay alert," Christian mumbled, his words slurring slightly. "This place, it's trying to undo us." Hopeful nodded sluggishly, shaking his head as if to clear away cobwebs. "Let's talk," he suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me, how did your faith first take root?" As they trudged through the deceptively peaceful landscape, they began to recount their spiritual journeys. At first, their voices were faint, barely audible above the susurrus of the enchanted air. But as they spoke of their trials and triumphs, their words gained strength, pushing back against the oppressive atmosphere. Christian's voice grew firmer as he described his initial doubts, the crushing weight of sin that had once threatened to break him. "It was like carrying a boulder on my back," he said, his eyes distant with memory. "Every step was agony until I found the strength to let it go." Hopeful listened intently, recognition flickering in his eyes. When it was his turn, he spoke of how hope had blossomed in the darkest moments of his life. "It was like a tiny flame," he said, his voice growing stronger. "Fragile at first, but it grew brighter with each challenge I faced." As they talked, their steps became more purposeful, their eyes clearer. The enchanted ground spell began to lose its grip, unable to compete with the vibrant reality of their shared experiences. Suddenly, they noticed another figure on the path ahead, moving with the slow, dreamlike gait of one caught in the ground's snare. The figure's outline was blurred, as if seen through a heat haze. "Ho there, fellow pilgrim," Christian called out, his voice cutting through the drowsy air. "What is your name?" The figure turned slowly, blinking as if emerging from a deep slumber. "I am Hopeful," he said, his voice thick with confusion. Christian and Hopeful exchanged surprised glances. "Another Hopeful," Christian exclaimed. "Come, join us. We were just discussing the dangers of backsliding." As the three continued on, they spoke of Turnaway, a cautionary tale of a pilgrim who had abandoned the path. The new Hopeful listened intently, the fog of enchantment visibly lifting from his eyes as he absorbed their words. Together they pressed on through the enchanted ground, their voices a bulwark against the insidious drowsiness. With each step, each shared story, they grew stronger, more resolute in their purpose. At last the air began to change. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a lightness that seemed to buoy their spirits. They had reached the border of the enchanted ground. Before them stretched a land of indescribable beauty. Rolling hills covered in lush grass swayed gently in a warm breeze. Flowers of every hue imaginable dotted the landscape, their sweet fragrance carried on the air. "Beulah," Christian breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. "We have reached the land of Beulah." As they stepped into this new realm, it was as if they had entered a different world entirely. The sun shone with a gentle, constant light, neither too harsh nor too dim. Birds filled the air with joyous song, their melodies intertwining in a celestial chorus. The pilgrim's weariness melted away, replaced by a deep sense of peace and joy. They could see in the distance the shimmering spires of the celestial city, their final destination. Inhabitants of Beulah approached, their faces radiant with welcome. They offered refreshment and rest to the travel-worn pilgrims, who gratefully accepted. As Christian, hopeful, and their new companions settled in to enjoy the abundance of Beulah, they felt a renewed strength coursing through them. The trials of the enchanted grounds seemed distant now, like a half-remembered dream. Here in this land of perpetual spring, where flowers bloomed without cease and the sun never set, they found the perfect respite. Their hearts swelled with anticipation, knowing that the celestial city was now within reach. They rested in Beulah, savoring its delights, allowing its peace to seep into their very souls. With each passing moment, they felt more prepared for the final leg of their journey, their spirits buoyed by the promise of what lay ahead. As the day wore on, Christian noticed a change in the air. A cool breeze began to blow, carrying with it the faint sound of rushing water. He stood up, straining his eyes towards the horizon. In the distance, he could see a dark line cutting across the landscape, separating them from the celestial city. "Friends," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of excitement and apprehension, "I believe our final challenge awaits us. Do you hear it? The river of death calls us to its banks." Hopeful and their new companion rose, their faces a mixture of determination and fear. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the comfort of Beulah, the sound of the river grew louder, a constant reminder of the final obstacle that stood between them and their ultimate goal. Christian, hopeful, and their companions finally reached the river of death. They stood at its edge, knowing they must cross this treacherous water to enter the celestial city. The air grew thick with tension as they gazed upon the dark, churning waters before them. No bridge spanned its width. No boat waited to ferry them across. The only way forward was through. Christian's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and anticipation coursing through his veins. He took a deep breath, the scent of damp earth and murky water filling his nostrils. With trembling legs, he stepped into the icy river. The shock of cold hit him like 1,000 needles piercing his skin. He gasped, struggling to keep his footing on the slippery riverbed. The water rose quickly, to his waist, his chest, his neck. Panic clawed at his mind, doubts swirling like the currents around him. "Help!" he cried out, his voice barely a whisper against the roar of the river. "I'm sinking!" Hopeful, true to his name, plunged in after his friend. He grasped Christian's arm, his grip firm and reassuring. "Remember the promises, brother," he shouted over the rushing water. "God is with us, even here." Together they fought against the current. Each step was a battle, muscles screaming with effort. The far shore seemed to stretch further away with each labored breath, but they pressed on. Their faith burned like a beacon, guiding them through the darkness. At last, solid ground met their feet. Exhausted and dripping, they crawled onto the opposite bank, collapsing onto soft grass. As they caught their breath, a warm light began to glow around them. Two radiant figures appeared, the shining ones, their faces kind and welcoming. "Well done, good and faithful servants," one said, helping Christian to his feet. "The celestial city awaits." With renewed strength, Christian and Hopeful followed their celestial guides up a winding path. The air grew sweeter with each step, filled with the scent of flowers they had never known. The path beneath their feet seemed to glow, each step bringing them closer to their ultimate destination. Suddenly they crested a hill, and there before them stood the gates of the celestial city. The sight took their breath away, towers of pearl and gold stretching up into the clouds, walls of jasper gleaming in the eternal light. A joyous sound filled the air as a host of heavenly beings poured out from the gates, their voices raised in songs of welcome. Christian's hand trembled as he reached for the scroll tucked safely in his garment, the certificate he had guarded so carefully throughout his journey. Hopeful produced his as well, and they presented the scrolls to the welcoming host with reverent care. "These must be brought before the king," one of the celestial beings announced, taking the scrolls with gentle hands. The pilgrims waited, their hearts racing with nervous excitement. Time seemed to stand still, but at last a great cheer went up from the gathered host. "The king approves," came the joyous cry. "Enter, faithful pilgrims, into the joy of your Lord." As Christian and hopeful stepped through the gates, a miraculous transformation overcame them. Their travel-worn clothes melted away, replaced by garments of purest white that shimmered with an inner light. Crowns of gold appeared on their heads, and harps materialized in their hands. The weight of their long journey fell away, replaced by a lightness of spirit they had never known. Joining their voices with the heavenly chorus, Christian and hopeful began their eternal praise of the King, their hearts overflowing with joy and gratitude for the journey that had brought them home at last. Meanwhile, back in the city of destruction, a seed of change had been planted. Christiana, Christian's wife, found herself unable to shake the memory of her husband's departure. The void he left behind grew heavier with each passing day, until at last, she could bear it no longer. With tears in her eyes and determination in her heart, Christiana gathered her 4 sons around her. "We must follow in your father's footsteps," she declared, her voice trembling but resolute. "We too shall seek the celestial city." As word of their plans spread, their neighbor Mercy was moved by their courage. "Let me join you," she pleaded, and Christiana welcomed her with open arms. And so, a new pilgrimage began. Christiana, her sons, and Mercy set out on the path Christian had walked before them. They faced many of the same challenges: the Slough of Despond, the hill difficulty, the valley of the shadow of death. Yet their journey was marked by more assistance, as if the way had been smoothed by those who had gone before. Their company grew as they traveled, other pilgrims joining their band, drawn by their faith and perseverance. Together they passed through dangers that would have overwhelmed them alone. They shared in joys that were multiplied by their fellowship. They overcame obstacles that seemed insurmountable, their combined strength carrying them forward. At last, after many trials and triumphs, Christiana and her companions arrived at the banks of the river of death. With faith in their hearts and the memory of Christian's crossing to inspire them, they waded into the waters. And there, on the far shore, the celestial city awaited, its gates open wide to welcome them home. As Christiana stepped through those shining gates, her eyes searched the radiant faces before her, and there, more glorious than she had ever seen him, stood Christian. Their reunion was one of unspeakable joy, a moment of completion that marked the beginning of their eternal bliss in the presence of the King. The journey was complete. The pilgrims had found their way home, their faith rewarded with an eternity of peace and joy in the celestial city. And though their earthly trials were over, their greatest adventure was just beginning.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.